Welcome to continue eating, but we do have to get going with the program. And thanks to the staff here at Eagle Eye, by the way, for the lunch. So I was very fortunate, we're all very fortunate to have George here today. I came across his book and then wondered how to get a hold of him. And Donna Gardner, who has been a mutual friend of ours for some time, said, "Oh, George is an old friend of mine. I can help." And so what I want to do is bring Donna up to applause because I thank you for helping us do this. And she's going to introduce today's speaker, George Franklin. So Donna Gardner.
I'm a little shorter than Chris. Thank you, Chris, for giving me the opportunity to introduce to you all a dear and wonderful friend of mine, George Franklin. George and I met a couple of decades ago. We're not talking dates, but and I was immediately captivated by this very witty, smart man, and so a great joy for me to have him in my former hometown, Lansing, Michigan. George Franklin is a lawyer and the former vice president of worldwide government relations for Kellogg Corporation. And that's what he was doing when I met him, and he was traveling all over the world. He has held numerous positions in and out of government, including member of the Industry Select Advisory Committee on Consumer Goods of the U.S. Department of Commerce, member of the U.S. Department of Agriculture Human Nutrition Advisory Committee, amongst several others. So he's had his fingers in a lot of pockets. In addition, well, that didn't sound right, did it? No, I'm going to retract that. See, I should not have gone off script. In addition to having testified before Congress as the representative of the food industry, he is currently the president of Franklin Public Affairs, LLC. Over the past decade, he calls this his retirement job. He has published several books, all of them hysterically funny. He ran for Congress in 2018, and one of his novels is So You Think You Want to Run for Congress. If anybody wants to run for office, you must read this book first. And his latest, which is his most recent book, is A Feeding Frenzy in Washington, about an omnibus funding bill that will make you scratch your head about government. A rollicking tale from a Washington lobbyist that will have you, as I said, hysterically laughing and also make you wonder about the state of our government. There's more information about that in your program. I know you're going to love this man. He is hysterically funny. He has a million stories, and he loves questions. So challenging.
Mike here? Is this will work here? Yeah. Could you set it?
Hello. There we go.
Turn that one off.
Well, that was a sigh of relief when he said Donna's going to come up and introduce you. Oh my God, what's going to happen here? Now, the president of AARP. I am a member. I am almost old enough to run for president. You know, we got these two banging around at 80. I'm not quite there, so I'll probably get attacked for my youth and inexperience. But, you know, it's something, keep in mind. I'll need AARP support if I change my mind. Jason, running for Congress, don't do it. You got to read the book. You'd lose your mind. Thank you for having me, everybody. This looks like a fun group. Chris, thank you. Yeah, I've written 4 books, and actually my first book is very oriented to this group. It was I was the vice president of worldwide government affairs of the Kellogg company, and I worked with a lot of really smart people that had degrees from all sorts of fancy institutions and MBAs. And the one thing I quickly found out, though, was nobody really understood government relations. So I called the dean of the business school at Western Michigan University, and I said, "Do you teach government relations?" She goes, "Well, no, that's political science." I said, "Well, you know, that's interesting, because every major company in the United States has a government relations department. just like sales, finance, and marketing. But they just act like it doesn't exist. So I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write a book about lobbying. And it's not going to be philosophy or theory or any of this, Plato's views of the world or something. It's going to be what you really do as a lobbyist for a big company like Kellogg, as opposed to what people think you do. It's called Raisin Bran and Other Cereal Wars. And if I do say so, it did pretty well, because I had some interesting, I took Muhammad Ali to ground zero 9 days after 9/11. People don't remember he lived in Benton Harbor. And Mayor Giuliani called us and said, can you help get him here? Because as a Muslim, he's spoken out against the violence. So we took I got the company plane, we went to Benton Harbor, picked up Muhammad Ali, flew to White Plains, New York, had a police escort take us in, and it was one of the most emotional days of my life. We went to the fire station where all the firemen had been killed. We went to the missing persons center. And then at the end of the day, we went to ground zero. And the unimaginable was driving down the streets of New York with a military blockade stopping you and looking ahead and seeing 13 stories of smoking rubble, which was the World Trade Center. But that was my first book. It was Raisin Bran and Other Cereal Wars. And then, in a moment of temporary insanity, I ran for Congress. Now, that was crazy. And I will tell you, though, it was the most exhausting thing I ever did. I found out if you come in second out of 6, that doesn't work. So that was it. Spoiler alert, that's where I ended up. But it was quite an experience. And as I said, it was exhausting. But I said, I'm going to write a book that tells people what it's really like to run for Congress, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So that was my second book. And then the third one is, where's the woman from the MEDC? There she is. You were with the MEDC, right?
I was.
You were with. The book, I said, I'm going to go to the fiction part because that's more fun than trying the nonfiction. So I wrote a book making fun of corporate America under the mantle of free enterprise and capitalism, wallowing in the government trough. And the book is called Incentives. And it's based here in Southwest Michigan. It has a lot of the areas we're all familiar with. And it was a good natured poke at corporations and seeking incentives and the interaction with government. This last one is called A Feeding Frenzy in Washington. And the main character is a fellow named P.J. Snake Boots Jackson. Now, P.J. is a composite figure. The terrifying is there are people like him running around Washington. P.J. represents the food industry. And once again, spoiler alert, the Wienermobile gets hijacked by vegans. The plan is, PJ is trying to get $5 million in an appropriations bill, in the Department of Agriculture appropriations bill. And throughout the book, I tell people there's a thread of reality, though. I mean, it's fiction, but it's kind of not fiction. And so he gets together with a bunch of food lobbyists and he says, okay, boys, you know all that Mr. Smith goes to Washington and civics classes and all that business we heard about, that's all a bunch of bunk. He said, what we're going to do is we're going to get this thing plugged in there at the beginning, get that $5 million, you're never going to see the light of day again until the appropriation bill comes out on the other end. It's based on a true story. When I was the chairman of the board of Western Michigan University, we were moving the aviation school from the Kalamazoo airport to the Battle Creek, and we needed some federal money. So we went to see with an undisclosed prominent Democratic figure in this state. I went to meet with John Murtha, who was chairman of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. So this guy had, 25% of the whole U.S. budget under him. So we had a briefing book, and we came in, and we said, why ought to give us $5 million to move it from Kalamazoo to Battle Creek? About a 30-minute meeting. He takes the briefing book, writes $5 million on it, hands it to the staffer, says, put it in the bill. My job from there on was do nothing. Don't write a press release, don't thank anybody, don't go see anybody, don't lobby anybody further. The thing was parked in that bill, and a year later, it came out. So what PJ was doing is the reality of how Washington really works. Now, to scare the bejesus out of you, let's talk about how Washington's working now. Our problem goes back to 1931. What happened in 1931 in your wildest imagination? We sing this song at every sporting event. Everybody watch the Super Bowl? Star Spangled Banner? How does it end? What are the last few words? Land of the free. These bozos took it literally. They've been doing it ever since. That was when the national anthem was made the official national anthem of the United States. So the land of the free, and they've been working on it ever since. The national debt is $34 trillion. Okay, you're the financial people. How many zeros in 34 trillion? Come on. Too many? 12. I thought you guys would get me. Yeah, there's 12. $34 trillion. If you took $100 bills and stacked them up to get the 34 trillion, it would take 14 Washington monuments. Washington Monument is 555 feet, 5 1/8 inches high. To get the 34 trillion, that's what you'd have to stack them up. Now this is bipartisan looting, okay? All right, this is not just one party or the other. When President Trump was president, under his 4 years, the debt went up $8 trillion. Now to be fair, it was only 7.9, but Washington, we round things off, but a point trillion here or there. Now our man Joe, he's put 7 trillion in already, but he's got another year to go, so he'll probably catch him. So we're coming about there, but it's a lot of money that is being spent. Okay, we all complain about how much Washington spends. How much does Washington spend a year, typically?
Nobody knows, they don't know.
Yeah, well, that's a technical detail. Okay, this year's budget is $6.6 trillion. That's what the government is going to spend this year if they have their way. We're the land of the free. Ooh, lobbyists. Where does the word lobbyist come from? What do you think? Anybody?
Deals were made in the lobby?
Close. It actually goes to the early days of Parliament when people seeking favors from members of Parliament would stand outside in the lobby. Okay? Just as much as they sort of do now in Washington. There's one other theory that it was when Grant was the president and people would be in the lobby of the Willard Hotel, but I don't think that's the correct one. I think the correct one is members of Parliament. Okay, anybody have the roughest idea how many lobbyists there are in Washington, D.C., at least there were last year?
How many people are there?
Okay, there were 12,112 registered lobbyists in Washington last year. Okay, what do we think they spent on lobbying, at least according to the official reports? $4.1 billion. Okay, and this year, just so you don't think things have changed much, the lobbyist numbers have grown. And what do lobbyists do? What do they manage? PACs, political action committees. Last year, or 2 years ago, there were over 9,000 political action committees that gave away $6.1 billion. And they ain't doing it for good government, okay? But that's what's going on. That's where the lobbyists come in. Pork barrel politics, you gotta love it. Okay, where does this word come from? We use it all the time. Pork barrel politics is how you get votes, right? You give people a piece of the pork. It goes back to the slave era, when slave owners would give the slaves barrels of salted pork as reward for a good day's work, and they would divide it up among themselves. So that's where pork barrel comes from. But like anything else, it has been refined to a new level, even better. Earmarks. All right, the quiz continues. Where do you think earmarks comes from? All these terms we use all the time. Earmarks comes from the days when cattle roamed free on the range. And in order to identify who owned which cattle, you would put a distinctive mark on their ear. So in the political world, this is how you get the gravy for your district. If it comes home to your district, it's good government. If it goes to another district, it's horrific spending, okay? We all know that routine. In the 2023 budget, there were 7,000 some earmarks worth $15 billion. In the current House bills, the House hasn't finished passing all the bills, sort of pending this year. There are 4,000 earmarks. Sort of 2-to-1 Republican over Democrat, because the Republicans control the House. And they're up to about $7 billion. So if the trend continues, earmarks will be here and they're back with a vengeance. Nation of laws. You're going to hear this all the time about Washington. You know, we are a nation of laws, not men. Total poppycock. Nonsense. In 1896, there was a case called Plessy v. Ferguson. And Plessy v. Ferguson said that separate facilities, segregated facilities, were constitutional. 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education ruled that separate was inherently unequal. Not one word of the United States Constitution had changed. Not one word, okay? Let's do the hot button, Roe v. Wade. Okay, whatever side you're on, pro-choice, right to life. Not one word of the United States Constitution changed. What's the most important number in the Constitution, not in the Constitution, I should say, rather. What's the most important number?
Number of justices.
5. Because then you win. Judges read papers. Judges watch the news. Judges live in communities. I have one that sort of personally I'm familiar with. It's a little unusual. Rosa Parks bus. My father was a lawyer from the company who went down to negotiate with Martin Luther King. We used to say in our family it was my dad's bus, okay? And he thought very highly of Martin Luther King, by the way. But there's a little known case, it's probably one of the most important civil rights cases that nobody's ever heard of. It's called Broder v. Gale. And it went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled that the Alabama segregation statutes were unconstitutional, okay? It did not include Rosa Parks. They didn't want to, Thurgood Marshall, who brought the case, did not want to include Rosa Parks because it was going to be too controversial and she had a criminal record which would cloud the issue. Judges read newspapers. Judges knew the turmoil in Montgomery, Alabama. Judges are real people. 5-4 wins, and that's how they rule. Special interest. This word means nothing. We're all special interests. The Sierra Club is a special interest. General Motors is a special interest. Every group in Washington is a special interest. A special interest is the group against you. Whoever you are, the group against you is the special interest. Because it has this pejorative connotation that there's some, they're the backroom dealers, there's something seedy about them. So special interest, but it's a meaningless term. Because everybody in Washington is a special interest. Pro-business. I was the head of government relations for one of the larger, more successful companies in the world. I think that's fair. Kellogg. I have no idea what this word means. I have no idea what this word means most of the time. Depends on who you are. If you're General Motors, bringing in drugs from Canada, decrease healthcare costs, that's pro-business. That's very pro-business. If you're Pfizer in Kalamazoo, that's anti-business. Depends on who you are. The Export-Import Bank. People know what that is. Generally, simple version is it's an entity in the United States that lends cheap money to foreign companies so they can buy American goods. Hey, that's pro-business. That sounds good to me. So if you're Boeing, that's a great idea. It's pro-business. If you're Delta, it's anti-business. Delta Airlines says, why the hell are they lending money to Aer Lingus and Air France to our competitors so they can come compete with us. Pro-business doesn't mean anything. Once you see the pro-business, put your antenna up. Figure out who's in what business. This is my favorite at the end, though. This is Kellogg. I'd come back in from Washington to Battle Creek, and they'd go, why don't they just do what's right? You know, just go to Washington and do what's right. I don't understand. And I said, well, you know, here's the problem. If you're a cowboy from Montana, you probably have a lot different view than if you're a Hispanic from Harlem. And so whose version of just doing what's right can be quite different depending on who you are and where you come from. I do know one thing that's just right, though. What you need to do is buy one of my books. Get an adult libation. And hopefully you start laughing, because the only other thing you can do when you talk about Washington is cry. Read the book, put your feet up, have a good time. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Well, we certainly have a few minutes for Q&A. I'd like to start with this question.
Yeah.
So when you read the book, Frenzy in Washington, you talk about Pop-Tarts. That's like the main ingredient of the thing. And I'm wondering how that sat with your old employers.
Well, they haven't sued me, so that's always good. You know? But I figure if they sue you, it's like one of my favorite stories of corporate America, the brilliance of corporate America. Everybody knows North Face. In fact, I saw somebody wearing, sweatshirts and things say North Face. So some college kids came up with a product line called South Bud. So the whiz-bangs at North Face sued the college kids at South Bud. Sold them more T-shirts than they ever could imagine. You know? But no, I haven't heard a word. In fact, here's fun, because this is local. I guess not fun, but one of the original people in creating Pop-Tarts just died. His name was Bill Post, and I knew Bill Post. The Pop-Tart factory in Grand Rapids, if it ran 24 hours straight, take a wild guess, how many Pop-Tarts could it make in a day? Wow. It's a crazy figure. You don't believe there's this many teenagers in the world, right? 5 million. 3 a day. 300-foot baking lines. So 3 football fields, about 15 feet wide. And if you ran it 24 hours straight, you could crank out about 5 million. But anyways, the story behind Pop-Tarts was, there was a guy named Bill DeMoth who ended up becoming chairman and CEO of Kellogg. He, ironically, the Post cereal company had this product that was sort of like a Pop-Tart thing. And Kellogg got in a panic, and we got to have something to compete with it. So they came up with this, Pop-Tarts. But they didn't have any facility to make it, so he got in the car and drove to Grand Rapids to Heckman Bakeries, which became part of Keebler. And he found this guy, Bill Post, ironically, to compete with Post. But Post said, yeah, I can make something like that for you. But the other leg of the stool, though, was great. He also said, well, I need some jam or jelly to put in this thing. So he'd heard about this guy, Paul Smucker, in Orrville, Ohio. So he got in the car and drove to Orrville. They shook hands, and the 3 of them helped create, the national iconic brand of Pop-Tarts. And it was all done on a handshake, too.
But the irony of the whole thing is the process of getting Pop-Tarts through, because it was nutritionally sound for the troops.
Yeah.
That was
Donald Rumsfeld, when he was Secretary of Defense, why in the world he did this airdrop Pop-Tarts into Afghanistan. Now, what he thought the Afghans were going to do with Pop-Tarts, I don't know, each one came with a toaster, I don't know. That's once again, there's a thread of truth to all this, and you say, my God, how do we, keep our sanity? Yeah.
I can have both. Wow. So this is maybe an interesting question, maybe not. But how do you differentiate, or how would you differentiate the difference between, and maybe one of them isn't really a lobbyist, but you have like organizations such as like Michigan Association of School Boards or the Alzheimer's Association or environmental agencies that do their own lobbying for funding for research and the such. And I feel like there's a distinct, and this might just be because I don't know any better, a distinct difference between that kind of lobbying and the other kind of lobbying.
Well,
Yes.
I mean, there's a legal definition of lobby, and what is your sort of primary purpose, focus, okay? And so it's de minimis. If you're just with a group that goes to Washington once a year, a handful of people that are involved in a certain industry, you don't have to register as a lobbyist. Yet you may have someone in the organization who's a full-time lobbyist has to register. But most of it's all a fiction. All these groups lobby, okay? And you can call it educating if you want to avoid being called lobbying, which is a way to get around having to register as a lobbyist. But there's legal definitions that trigger all those things. Yeah. But I was a registered lobbyist. Our theory was, I didn't do anything that I wouldn't be proud to show up on the front page of the New York Times. So I said, I'm a registered lobbyist. I lobbied for Kellogg. I had my own company. I lobbied for other people later. But it's, some people don't want to have to do it.
That also is a pretty big, wide spectrum of things that appear on the front page.
Oh, yeah.
You're pretty safe waters. Anybody else?
Yeah. Question. I hear people talking about the good old days all the time. Was there any, were the good old days actually any good?
Yeah.
Any more questions?
I mean, I'll tell a person, I started off on Capitol Hill. I was a gopher. I was going to college and law school at night. The Congress sort of put me through college and law school. It was a liberal Democrat from New Jersey. Okay. The ranking Republican was a guy named Ashbrook, who we would now call Tea Party or Freedom Caucus or, far right. They were best buddies. And I would watch lobbyists go in and start, ridiculing Ashbrook, just assuming that, they were opposing sides. And I felt like, stop, the other one, Tip O'Neill and Bob Michael. Tip O'Neill was the speaker. Bob Michael was the minority leader from Illinois. Bob Michael's daughter, Lori, represented Nestle. So we were downtown, a bunch of lobbyists talking, blah, blah, blah. Is Congress going to be in? Congress, blah, 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 blah. And finally, Lori says, I guarantee you Congress will be out Friday afternoon. And we said, well, how's that? She goes, my dad and the speaker have a tea time at 2. They don't have tea times together anymore. That's
Interesting. Well, George, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so, the other thing is there's a lot of people in the room, and I loved your question, Jamie. There's a fine line between people who lobby and lobbyists. And the one thing I found is the difference is that if you're a registered lobbyist, you can't go on the House floor, or you can't go on the Senate floor. So it's more restrictive than anything else, right? Okay, so want to thank you all, of course, for being here. Want to thank our sponsors again. Shaheen Chevrolet Cadillac, Dean Transportation, the Capital Area International Airport, Capital Region, I'm sorry, and LaughQ. Thank you all for supporting this effort. George, you are not as hilarious as I thought you were going to be, but the reason is, when you read the book, it is hilarious, but it's dangerously close to the truth. And that's the scary part of this whole thing. So thanks for coming here and helping us with that. I want to thank my team too. Sarah Mosier, Ben Robinson, Elizabeth Mosier, Michelle O'Kelly, and Jeffrey Mosier. That's a lot of Mosiers. Do we have a nepotism rule on this? Thank you all for being here. Currently, we're working on our sports luncheon, business sports luncheon for the spring. Look for it mid to late April. We'll let you know where it's at. It'll be back at the airport because they're going to be all trained out by then, right? They're training right now. So with that, thanks so much for being here. Have a prosperous month, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.